Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that your house no longer belongs to your country. The road outside your window, suddenly it belongs to a different nation. The little shop across the street where you buy snacks, that's another country now. And the park where you used to play as a kid, just walking into it could technically make you a foreigner. Sounds completely ridiculous, right? Impossible, even. But here's the strange truth. For almost all of human history, none of this madness would have mattered at all. Because countries didn't exist. Not even a little bit. No borders, no passports, no immigration officers checking your bag at an airport, no maps with neat, colorful lines separating us from them. So here's the real mystery. If nobody invented countries for hundreds of thousands of years, if our ancestors spent almost their entire time on this planet without a single nation existing anywhere, then who finally decided where one country ends and another begins? Who drew the first line? And why do billions of people today believe those invisible lines are worth protecting, worth arguing over, worth going to war for, worth dying for? Stay till the end because the last part of this story is going to completely change how you think about ancient humans and about the very country you're living in right now. Let's go back, way back, before kings, before governments, before the idea of my country ever crossed a single human mind. For most of our existence as a species, humans lived in small, tight groups. Think a few families traveling together, maybe 20 or 30 people total. These groups followed the animals they hunted. They followed the rivers that gave them water. They followed the seasons, moving with the changing weather the same way birds migrate today. If the food in one area disappeared, they packed up and moved somewhere else. If another group of humans appeared on the horizon, sometimes they'd trade tools or stories. Sometimes they'd simply avoid each other and walk in a different direction. And sometimes, if resources were tight, they'd fight. But here's what nobody did. Nobody stood on top of a hill, pointed at the land below, and said, "Everything from this rock over there to that mountain in the distance belongs to us, forever." Why would they? There was simply too much land, and too few people walking around on it. Owning a giant stretch of earth made zero sense when your entire life was built around constantly moving to wherever survival took you. Claiming land you were going to leave in 2 weeks anyway would have sounded as strange to them as someone today trying to claim ownership of a cloud passing overhead. For thousands and thousands of years, that was simply how life worked. No borders, no ownership, just movement, survival, and small groups of people who trusted each other because they had to. Then, everything changed. Around 12,000 years ago, humans stumbled onto something that would completely rewrite the future of our species. Something so simple, yet so revolutionary that historians still consider it one of the biggest turning points in human history. Instead of constantly chasing their food across the land, humans figured out they could grow it themselves. Take a second and really picture this shift. For generation after generation, your entire family survived by following herds of animals and searching for wild fruits and plants. Movement was survival. Staying still for too long could mean starving once the local food ran out. But now, suddenly, there was another option. Plant seeds in the ground. Wait, water them, protect them, and eventually harvest more food than you could get by wandering around hoping to get lucky. But this new method came with a catch, and it's a catch that changed absolutely everything. Farming meant staying in one place. Not just for a few days, but for months, then years, then entire generations, as families passed their farmland down to their children, who passed it down to their children. People started building actual homes instead of temporary shelters. Villages began forming where there used to be nothing but open land. And suddenly, leaving wasn't easy anymore. Imagine spending months clearing land, planting crops, digging a well by hand, and building a shelter for your family only to just walk away and let strangers take it all. That's not something you'd do easily. That's something you'd protect. So people began defending the land around them for the very first time in human history. Not because the soil itself was magical or sacred, but because their entire survival now depended on staying exactly where they were. This is the moment land ownership was basically born. Not because someone woke up one day and invented the concept out of nowhere, but because farming forced humans to become attached to specific pieces of ground in a way nomadic life never required. Now, once villages started growing bigger and bigger, a whole new problem showed up. More people meant more decisions that needed to be made, and more chances for arguments and conflict. Who gets to farm which field? Who's in charge of storing food for the winter so the whole village doesn't starve if the harvest is bad? Who steps in when two families start arguing over whose land actually starts where? Someone had to make these decisions, and that's exactly how leaders began to appear. At first, it was probably the most respected person in the village, the oldest, the wisest, the one everyone trusted to be fair. But as villages kept growing into bigger settlements, one wise elder giving advice wasn't enough anymore. Leaders needed people to actually enforce their decisions. So guards appeared. People whose entire job was to protect the village, the crops, and the stored food from outsiders who might try to take it. And as settlements kept expanding into full-blown towns, guards weren't enough either. Organized armies began forming. Groups of people trained specifically to defend territory and sometimes to expand it by taking land from neighboring groups. Before long, entire regions of land were being controlled by powerful rulers who commanded armies, collected resources from their people, and made the rules everyone else had to follow. Now, to be clear, these weren't countries the way we understand them today. There were no passports, no official borders recognized by the entire world, no national anthems. But make no mistake, these early kingdoms and territories were the very first rough sketches of what would eventually become the nations we live in now. As these civilizations kept growing bigger and more powerful, borders slowly started becoming a serious thing. And at first, it made a lot of sense how these borders were decided. Nature basically drew them for us. Mountains that were nearly impossible to climb, rivers too wide and dangerous to cross safely, thick forests and harsh deserts that made travel brutal. These natural barriers became the easiest, most obvious way to separate one kingdom's territory from another's, simply because they were easy to recognize and difficult to cross. But here's where things get messier, and honestly, a lot more human. Not every border came from nature. Many borders were created after brutal wars. One ruler's army would win a battle, another ruler's army would lose, and right there on the spot, a new line would be drawn across the land, deciding who now controlled what. Sometimes that new line followed a river, which made sense geographically, but sometimes it was drawn as a straight, artificial line cutting directly across farmland, forests, and even villages, without any regard for the people actually living there. And here's the part that should genuinely shock you. Millions of people throughout history suddenly found themselves living under a completely different ruler, following completely different laws without ever physically moving an inch. They woke up one morning still standing in the exact same house, on the exact same land, but now belonging to a different kingdom entirely, simply because a war ended and a new line got drawn somewhere nearby. Even today, right now, in the modern world, many national borders that still exist on our maps trace directly back to decisions made hundreds of years ago by rulers, armies, and wars that most people alive today have never even heard of. Now, here's something that's genuinely fascinating once you really stop and think about it. Most borders in the world are completely invisible. Imagine standing directly on top of an international boundary line, the exact spot where one country legally ends and another one begins. What would you actually see? Nothing. The grass looks exactly the same on both sides. The air doesn't suddenly change temperature or smell different depending on which country you're standing in. The trees growing along that line have absolutely no idea they've technically crossed into another nation. Only humans know. Only humans care. Because here's the truth hiding underneath this entire story. Countries were never physical objects to begin with. They're not something you can dig up out of the ground or hold in your hands. Countries are shared agreements. They exist purely because millions and millions of people all believe in the same rules, the same governments, the same laws, and the same shared identity. Take that shared belief away, and a border instantly becomes nothing more than an imaginary line scribbled on a map. No power, no meaning. Just ink. That's honestly what makes this entire story so incredible when you really sit with it. Ancient humans never sat down one day and invented countries in a single dramatic moment. There was no meeting, no announcement, no single genius who came up with the idea. Instead, humans slowly, gradually invented trust between strangers. Then leadership to organize that trust. Then property. Once farming gave people a reason to claim land. Then tighter communities to protect what they'd built. And eventually, generation after generation, humans built up the idea that certain groups of people belonged together, living safely within defined, protected borders. So the next time you look at a map of the world, really take a moment to look at it differently. Those colorful shapes, the ones separating one nation from another, weren't sitting there waiting to be discovered, like some hidden treasure buried under the earth. Humans created every single one of them, not with magic. Not because the land itself demanded to be divided that way, but through thousands of years of farming, cooperation, conflict, war, and shared belief passed down through countless generations. And now you've uncovered one of history's biggest hidden truths. The kind of truth that hides in plain sight because we're so used to seeing borders on maps that we forget they were ever invented at all. Countries may feel permanent. They may feel like they've always existed, like mountains or oceans, solid and unquestionable. But they are actually one of humanity's greatest inventions. Proof that sometimes the most powerful things shaping our entire world aren't made of stone or steel or nature at all. They're made entirely out of ideas. Ideas so powerful that we forgot we were the ones who created them in the first place.